David Myers, in his book, Pursuit of Happiness, Who is Happy and Why, he makes a statement about the culture, the world that we live in today, and this was written before our current economic situation, but he has written this: never has a culture experienced such comfort and opportunity or such massive genocide and environmental devastation. Never has a technology given us so many conveniences or such terrible instruments of degradation and destruction. Never have we been so self-reliant or so lonely. Never have we been so free or our prisons so overstuffed. Never have we had so much education or such high rates of teen delinquency and despair and teen suicide. Never have we been so sophisticated about pleasure or so likely to suffer broken or miserable marriages. Wow, what a downer. Surely we don't want to talk about this stuff on Mother's Day. Surely we want to focus on things that will make us feel joyful and happy and encouraged, but surely also we want to realize that as we gather here today on this Sunday in the year 2009, that we as parents, as mothers, we cannot keep out the world. And yet, surely as we come to this place, we want to ask ourselves the question, what type of faith heritage are we passing on to our children? What are we giving them that will sustain them, that will encourage them, that will embrace them in the days that we have yet to understand or to come? Surely our lives change immediately as a child comes into our life. Isn't that true? I mean, I had, and I told you before, people who told me, Linda, you have no idea how your life is going to change when you become a mother. You have no idea. And they were right. I didn't have any idea. It is true, isn't it, that children, whether they're our own children or children that come into our lives in other ways, that as soon as a child comes into our life, things change. Our perspective begins to change. Now, admittedly, early on, that's because of sleep deprivation. That's part of why, your perspective changes. But it is true, isn't it, as we begin to allow another life to be connected to us, and as we begin to take on responsibility for another life, that we begin to see even our own lives in a different fashion. Now let me begin, and I don't have to say this, I know you know this, I know I'm not a perfect mother, a perfect parent. Casey is here to tell you anything, all about how I'm not perfect. But it's also true, though, isn't it, that when God allows our lives to be open up to love, whether it be with a spouse or with a child or with a person that God places in our path, that when we allow ourselves to begin to love, we allow our perspective to begin to shift. One of the things that I am mindful of is as I begin that role of having a child in my life, I begin to see other children differently. I remember one time I went into Wendy's, and it was a time when, Casey, I was just trying to teach her a certain thing at that time, just to be able, to use a fork and spoon and that kind of thing. She was at that age, and I was by myself, and I had one of those frustrating days, and I walked into Wendy's, and I looked around, and I thought, well, look at all these kids. They're using forks and spoons. They can do it, surely she can do it, And then there's that sense sometimes that you just want to be reminded that other people are going through the same thing. But the other thing, and this has happened to me in just recent years, that I began to discover about, as I've looked at God's Word and I've read words like Paul to Timothy and seeing the sense of urgency that the generation that we are will pass on to other generations of faith that can be fanned and that can be strong and can endure. I find myself as I see other children and hear about other people, even as I look at our prayer concern list and see there the persons that are listed that are serving our country, I find myself saying this: that could be my son. That could be my daughter. As I read the paper and I hear about young people who are struggling and caught up in the drugs and in an aspect of life that pulls them away from family and from a connectedness of love and forgiveness, I find myself as I read those or see that on television saying, that could be my son. That could be my daughter. You know, we like to think it couldn't be, but as I hear those words being expressed, I find myself beginning to understand that heart of our parent God, and how He looks down upon us, and how He looks at those that are hurting and broken. And He not only says, that could be, He says, that is my son, my daughter. What do we do, dear friends, to offer to a hurting world that sense of faith that can be grow and nurtured in a way that you and I know that our generations that follow us will be in places like this in years to come? How can we send that message if it's not to lift up the person of Jesus Christ as one who not only gives direction and gives a map, but walks with our children and our children's children, who walks with the young people in our community who have yet to understand what it is to be connected to a God that understands and forgives and embraces.